did invite Jeffrey to come for just the first couple minutes, because there's a really interesting parallel with just the timing of this discussion and this group. So our green team, our congregational church green team has been doing this series around Earth Day for 5 or so years now. And it was in 2019, right around this weekend, when Brian Souter was our speaker, and he gave a wonderful presentation. And I just remembered at the end that I made a comment about something I was about to do, which I don't usually do because I don't like talking about things until they happen. I feel like if you talk about them before they happen, you jinx them. So I said, so what was happening was that week on the Sunday and then the Wednesday of that upcoming week, I was going to give my notice to my law firm where I practiced for 10 years and basically step away from the practice of law after 20 years because I wanted to devote my time full time to pretty much waste management, materials management. And the same day I gave my notice to my law firm, which was May 15th, I got an offer from Collective Resource Compost, the company who I had been working with for a number of years, like to get compost going here in Winnetka, at Harvard Wood School, at events, things like that, at the church. And so I worked with Collective Resource for a couple of years, and I stopped working with them last fall, but because of the way the timing of the pandemic played out, my work with them ended up being much more virtual over the last few years, and I attended a lot of committee meetings. I ended up joining a state level task force that Governor Pritzker had put together in 2019 that was literally called the Materials Management Advisory Committee. And it was a group that would have met in Springfield, and I never would have been part of it had it not been for the virtual meetings. But because they were virtual and because that was my job at the time, I was able to sit in on every single meeting for the next 6 months. I sat in on every main meeting, every subcommittee meeting. I connected with the US Composting Council. I became a member of that organization. I became more active through Collective Resource. I joined and became active in the Illinois Food Scrap and Composting Coalition, which is all about food scrap diversion and composting those organics, and started doing some policy work. Joined the policy committee, co-chaired the policy committee within the Illinois Food Scrap and Composting Coalition. So this is pretty much what I've been doing, like I said, full time. Whether I've been paid for it or not, I tell people it's like I got a master's degree in this during the pandemic. It was really great. But the kicker is that, so the real, the perfect circularity to all of this is that tomorrow I start my new job as the Zero Waste Policy Manager for the Illinois Environmental Council.
So what do you know?
It's a brand new role. I will be doing a lot of what I have been doing and filling in other things that other people within the organization have been doing, but they haven't had a dedicated point person for it, and I will be that person. So I'll be talking to people, I'll be talking to you a lot more. I'll be talking to the city of Chicago. I'll be talking to other people in the state. I'll be talking to other people out of state about their programs, recycling, food scraps, organics, batteries, all of it. So that's why I think it's important. Like really, like I've made it my life, honestly. So that's Jeffrey, I like the circular, it literally was like 4 years ago exactly that I shifted out of law and just was like, we'll see what happens. And 4 years later, Zero Waste Policy Manager, Illinois Environmental Council. So again, my message is every single one of you has that capability and capacity in you. It only takes one, literally. That's my message. That's why I said it 4 years ago. Just, if you're passionate about something, do it. So, thank you, Jeffrey, for joining us. So, that's just the top of this handout. I did bring other handouts. I didn't share those electronically only because they're already publicly available on both the Village of Winnetka website and the Go Green Winnetka website, which is gogreenwinnetka.org. We are a nonprofit. We're not trying to sell anything except zero waste and lower carbon footprints, and trying to make that easy for people. And then the Village of Winnetka website is villageofwinnetka.org. So like I said, I feel like my path is obviously unique, it's mine, but it's also emblematic. I'm not the only one. Yes, I love these materials, and we have them, and what do we do with them, and how do we deal with them responsibly? And I keep, in our area in Winnetka and the North Shore, I've always felt like it goes beyond just doing the right thing. We're all here because we want to do the right thing, and we know this is part of it, we know this is part of it. But it's also just about personal responsibility. I don't care what you think is good for the earth or not. If you're not taking care of your material and you're not paying attention to what can be recycled or what can be diverted from landfill, and you're just putting it all into landfill and making it somebody else's problem, you're still treating the world like a garbage can. And that's because the system sadly has been set up that way. But that's what we're trying to change. And that's what, again, we all are trying to change. And so it means don't just accept the status quo and don't just take the easy way out and say, okay, well, here's this bin, I'm just gonna put this stuff in it. And so it's hard because literally systematically, systemically, the whole system, especially in Illinois, is set up for landfill. There's a lot of lobbying strength in Illinois around landfill. Waste haulers still want their material, and they don't necessarily I'm gonna use food scraps as an example. It's my bread and butter, so to speak. But food scraps they're 30 to 40% of what goes into landfill in our country. When they go into landfill as organic material, landfills, as things get piled in them, and then ultimately they get capped, they become an anaerobic environment. There's no oxygen. There's no digestion. There's no breaking down. Everything sits there or leaches. Some things are inert and don't cause any problems. Organics are not inert. They break down. And when they break down, and they can't break down the way nature intended in a landfill, they release methane. Methane is 80 times more potent at capturing heat in the atmosphere in the first 20 years of its life than carbon dioxide is. We've all heard about carbon dioxide, CO2 for decades. Methane is the gas that is causing the most immediate warming effects right now. That's it. So as much as we can reduce methane emissions, we can have an immediate effect on not just increasing carbon emissions, but actually reversing them. We can take emissions out. We can have better systems that relate to our food scraps, that deal with them properly, including composting, that then can help absorb the carbon that has already been in the atmosphere. And it's truly a circular, not economy even, just it's nature. It's just the way it's supposed to work. And so we humans have messed it up by inserting ourselves in our own systems. And we're just trying to get back to kind of what nature intended, really, the simplicity of it. And there's a circularity to it. And so the picture that I put at the top half of the flyer is an excerpt from the EPA, the US Environmental Protection Agency. Back in 2020, the EPA had put out a draft national recycling plan. And I had just started working at Collective Resource about a year prior, but through the pandemic, I'd been doing more of the virtual stuff. So I was attending, I provided comment on that draft recycling strategy. It was initiated under the prior presidential administration. There was very little about food scraps, just very little big picture thinking. It was kind of basic. There wasn't a lot I could work with. I was like, okay, here's what it is. Not much there. Then that was literally like November 2020. And then obviously the election happened at the same time. And with the new administration taking office, fast forward to November 2021, and the current administration put out the new recycling strategy. Like the 2020 version had been the draft. So this was the final version. And it was totally different than what I had seen a year prior. It talked about a circular economy. It laid out this circular strategy series. So last year in 22, in November, so basically the administration, I don't know, I can't state that they're doing this, but so far they have been around America Recycles Day on November 15th each year. That's when they passed the bipartisan infrastructure law that has a lot of grants and funding available for recycling infrastructure, education, composting, all of it. And then they're announcing some of these, so the National Recycling Series with the chasing arrow symbol. That's you can find all of these, by the way, on the EPA website, which is epa.gov. So there's the National Recycling Strategy, and then each of the 5 boxes nested behind it are individual materials that the EPA is putting out material specific guidance on. They just released the plastics one like a week ago. It's a whole guide on how to deal with plastics, single-use plastics, plastic pollution, source reduction, all of it. And they're going to do that for each of those materials. So food waste and organics is next. I can't wait. But I understand why they did plastics first. That's really good. So, and then the critical minerals and electronics. Obviously that includes electronics, but it also includes batteries. And I know like the food scrap stuff has been in the works for a while. It does, I was gonna say feed on, sorry for all the puns, but it fits naturally with recycling in a way that some of these other, like there's not a natural connection with electronics and recycling, I guess some of it, but anyway, food, there's already a market and increasing a market for the food scraps. Anyway, what am I trying to say? I think the battery, the issue of recycling food scraps is pretty clear cut. The only downside to it is that there can be an egg factor. You need to make sure you get the ratio right. That's it, but it's the right thing to do with the food scraps. The issue with batteries is, what is the right thing to do? Like, nobody knows. They were recycled, they weren't recycled. How do you recycle them? It's not traditional technology that's used. So it is truly an evolving technology. Like food scrap composting is not evolving. That maybe there are some technologies that allow for anaerobic digestion, but if you're truly talking about composting, all that is mixing your food scraps with some landscape waste in an area and literally letting the microbes in nature do its work. That's it. So obviously when you're dealing with a man-made product or system, like a battery or a piece of electronics, we have to undo what we did. The food scraps, we don't have to undo anything. We just mix it with another material and put it in its right environment, and it will take care of itself. We just have to teach people that and make access to it, obviously. But so my point is the guides that are coming out on the food scraps, there's not going to be a whole lot of new information here. It's just for people. But the battery stuff is changing constantly, like how to do it, where to do it, what's the best way to do it. Do you send them somewhere? Do you drop off somewhere? What happens to them when you drop off? So I'm waiting to hear from the EPA on what they're recommending, because everybody wants to know about batteries, and there isn't a good answer. There isn't right now. So it's something that they've been working on precisely because there's no single answer the way there is about food scraps. Like, again, we know that, we just have to kind of create the infrastructure and access to it. And then the built environment, that refers to buildings, which is another huge part of our energy consumption and obviously materials use in terms of what goes into buildings and what happens when we take down buildings. You may have heard of an initiative called deconstruction. Anyone heard of deconstruction? Deconstruction? Not so many. So deconstruction is the process of if a home is going to be demolished, instead of just wrecking ball the house and demolishing it and hoping that some of it goes to a construction and is it construction and demolition? There's a C, it's the acronym for construction debris is C&D. It's a C&D warehouse. It's construction and, let's say, demolition. So it's more sort of industrial use. Like Lakeshore Recycling here in Winnetka, they started picking up all of the things we put curbside during spring cleanup week, because they can recycle a lot more of those materials than the prior hauler could, because they have a construction site, so they can recycle wood material, they can recycle like pots and pans, like sort of small metal bits. Again, they don't advertise it because it's not kind of traditional curbside recycling, and they don't want people dumping in construction debris on their curbside bin, but they have the capacity to handle some of those materials. And so deconstruction is the process of intentionally taking apart a house and reusing all of the materials that you can. It's donating them, it's selling them. There's a wonderful organization in Evanston called the Evanston Rebuilding Warehouse. And you can find stained glass windows, fireplaces, columns, arches, windows, doors, and it's not necessarily antique, but some of it is, and it's all reused. So people, and there are companies, there's a couple, the house that's being, well, I guess built now, but rebuilt over on Tower, right? Is it between Lincoln and Prospect, or between Foxdale and Lincoln? That's a deconstructed, that's a deconstructed home that's done by a company in Wisconsin. I can't remember the name of them, but they do some of those in Wisconsin. They post on Instagram and talk about what they're doing with the materials, where they go. So again, it's just all reusing it. And the whole reason I started doing this was not even that I felt like it was the right thing so much as it just made sense. Like, we're not wasteful people. We don't, like, none of us just throw things around. Like, if any of us were smokers, not that there's anything bad with that, but I can't imagine us throwing our cigarette butts out the window. Like, that's not us. But obviously, again, the systems are there, and unless you're thinking about it intentionally and proactively, it's really easy to just treat everything as garbage or trash. And so this whole movement toward a circular economy is recognizing that there's value in those materials, even at the end of their life. They're not waste. That's why it's starting to be called materials management, not waste management. I actually asked my new employer if they might consider changing my job title already. I haven't even started. I said, here's the kind of random idea I have. I've moved away from calling it zero waste, and zero waste policy manager is a mouthful. Not the materials management policy manager is any better, but at least it's all M's. And they're like, yeah, we really thought about this. We thank you for raising it. We decided to stick with zero waste. Thanks very much. We hope you still want to work with us. I was like, no, you're not going to take my title change. I'm not starting. But there's a reason that the language shifted away from that. It's to get at the broader idea of managing materials across their whole life cycle, not just at the end, and not when you're already thinking of them as waste. They're not. There's almost always value in those materials for somebody else, for some sort of reuse. Obviously, again, preaching to the choir, rummage sale coming up, the kings and queens of reuse. It truly, right? That's what you guys do. It's what Christ Church does. It's what the thrift shop does. And again, it's people who like doing that and are interested in making sure those materials have another life, right? Through donation. And then if something can't be sold or reused, how do we hopefully recycle it properly? And again, that's hard. It's actually harder for the church, I know, than for individuals. The infrastructure and the systems for institutions and commercial entities in the village is different than residential. Something else we're working on. But so again, the system it's set up against us, but I go back to the personal responsibility. Each have the power to do this. We know we can. It's the easiest thing to do, to just take responsibility for what we bring into our homes, what we order, what we eat, what we buy, what we put in our car, all of that. And then again, how do we handle it responsibly at the end of its life? So I encourage everybody to keep an eye out for these EPA guides. I'll forward them out through Go Green Winnetka. That's the big picture stuff. The other and I just put these on, they're just visuals, as you can tell. A nice visual of what the circular economy really looks like. Recognizing that, so the orange arrow is talking about materials extraction. The red arrow is manufacturing, yellow distribution, 4 is usage or consumer portion, and then 5 is the end of life management. So it's recognizing that there are different things we need to be doing as a world at each of these points along the process. not planning for obsolescence. How about that? Right? Not having our iPhones be planned to die in 3 years, so we have to buy new ones. Recognizing, I sadly saw an article yesterday in probably the New York Times about what they call it, the dirty underbelly of EV cars, because of all the energy that goes into extracting the lithium and what's the other one? What's the other?
Cobalt.
Cobalt, thank you, cobalt. Those are finite resources, people. That's not we need electric vehicles to get to the emissions problem, but it still doesn't address the extraction and the materials problem. And obviously the extraction, getting at those materials, that's mining. It's hard on the earth, it's hard on the people around it. There's no easy answer. It gets at shifting habits. It doesn't, to me though, there was somebody, are we being recorded?
Yes.
Okay, then I won't say it this way. There's a friend of mine who, he said he lives in Winnetka, and he basically said, look, in order for us to really make a difference in our materials management, we're all just gonna have to settle for a lower quality of life. And clearly nobody's gonna do that, because look at my neighbor and what they're building, and we're all just gonna go to HE double toothpicks. That's what he said. He's like, we're all just doomed, and it's that fatalist, and I'm like, no, I don't believe that. I don't believe we have no power over this. But also, some of that, honestly, some of that goes to religion, right? And feeling like, people feel it's like a fate, like they don't have power over it, or it's too far gone and it's out of their control. And so what can they do? And I keep bringing it back to, we all have that personal control and responsibility and initiative and ideas, and then we can be more powerful in a group. And so I won't give up the dream. The other thing I'll say, I included the food recovery hierarchy because I think it's another good visual, but reminder that composting, while important, is only one step better than landfill. It's still so much better to use your food, either reduce it in the first place so you don't create waste, use the excess to feed hungry people or feed hungry animals, both of which are keeping it food and making it better. Think of composting is like recycling food scraps. But if you can keep the food scraps as food and reuse them, it's like donating them. And then you use fewer resources to keep them in the system being used. So it takes less energy, less money, less transportation to have something recycled. So as important as composting is, it's the last part of it. And what we really want to focus on is reducing our consumption, our waste to begin with, and figuring out how to divert those resources from the landfill. And obviously with food scraps and food, it means donation. And then with other things, it's again, donate to a church, a rummage, another kind of place. But the one last thing I'll say on donation and sort of reuse is, and again, I think this is a good audience for it. No, two things. One is my mother-in-law is so amazing at re-gifting. She's elevated it. I'm not kidding. She gives you these amazing things. It's just one thing. It's one random thing. A wooden thing or a hat or a sweater. But she's thought about why the person she's giving it to might want it and what the connection is. And she writes a lovely personal note. And it's thoughtful and it's meaningful. My kids love it. And then she's making sure that these things that are important to her and her husband who passed away last fall, that these things are being carried forward and shared with people who care about them. So we get all of our sailing stuff because Jonathan and I love sailing. My son loves sailing. So I highly recommend it. Again, we have to shift our thinking. Don't think about regifting as this person's going to think I don't care about them because I didn't get them something new or I didn't make something from scratch. By the way, I don't cook, I don't bake. When I bring things to a bake sale, it's a no bake item and nobody's going to guilt me into not baking something. You do what you can. And if what you have is something cool in your attic and somebody's going to appreciate it, then give them that. And sure, it's not sitting in your attic gathering dust, but it's in somebody's home where they're going to love it and use it and highlight it. So like I said, I really encourage everybody to just think differently about your materials. Think about how you can use them. Think about how you can use them differently in your home. My mom came across this amazing, it wasn't even like a pillbox hat, but it was sort of that. And it was, it almost looked British, but it was green and it had red sequins on it, and it was clearly a Christmassy thing, and so it's like, my mom's like, when would I ever use that? And I'm like, Christmas time, like, just not even have to wear it, but put it out on your mantle, put it out on a tape, I don't know, I mean, display it in some way, I don't. And so she does now, she put it on like a candle on her mantle, and it's this beautiful sparkly thing that reminds us of our Aunt Mai, like, it's so fun. So again, I just highly recommend and suggest that everybody rethink these things, and in case you can't tell, I truly love doing it. Email gogreenwinnetka@gmail.com, and I will help you for free. I like doing this. I like helping people deal with their materials. I like finding reuse for them. I like saying, oh, I know this organization that could really use this totally random item that you have. They really need it. So I like doing that. And I know, as you know, my dad, as many of you may know, just moved out of his home in Winnetka last year. He just got a contract on the house though last week. But that they've been in that house for 30 plus years, and it was a year plus process to empty it. And I was really grateful to be a part of it, so I could, no, really, like, make sure, because it was overwhelming for them too. And I like doing it, and it's not overwhelming for me. I like doing it, and then I know that things are being dealt with responsibly. Nothing's going to landfill that doesn't have to. And everything's being recycled or reused or saved for the kids. My attic's much fuller now than it was, but in a really good way. Like, my kids are getting ready to launch. I've got, sophomore in college, a senior in high school, and a sophomore in high school. So yeah, I'm starting to think about random stuff for them as they, are starting their lives. So the last thing I want to say is that the other great thing about today's timing is that it is actually the first day of International Compost Awareness Week, which is a week-long educational campaign. It is the largest campaign of the global compost community. It is truly an international effort. Really, it started with Canada and the United States collaborating on some events, but it's grown. I don't know how many countries this year are having different events. But I know in Illinois, through this Food Scrap Coalition, we've worked on programming for the last couple of years. It's basically the first full week of May, from the first Sunday in May. So this year it's a little later. The last couple of years it's been the first week more so. But in Illinois, so this is the first year we did programming, it was all virtual. It was 2021, it was easy, it was a lunch and learn, it was COVID. We just did it all virtual. Last year, we tried to incorporate some in-person events. Couldn't do a whole lot of them, mostly it was just weather cooperating like ahead of time. But one of the things helped incorporate, and it's in the materials that I left over on the table, little business card things. This great cute little on the back of the shirt and shovel. My friend Terry and Go Green Winnetka created this. It's a little card that talks about ways to use your finished compost. Because the other thing I learned and wanted to learn about through the food scrap work and the state level work on materials was we all, and like in our community groups and at home, if we're thinking about diverting our food scraps, like again, if we're thinking of sort of how we can handle it, we're trying to, the education emphasis is on diverting from landfill, create a composting system and have that. But then there isn't much education, again, kind of among this group about like what happens next when we have that bin, and then where does it go and what happens to it? And right now, that bin sadly gets trucked to Rockford, where it gets mixed with the landscape waste because the infrastructure does not exist closer. I mean, there is some, obviously, but what they accept of the logistics. So right now it's going to Rockford, again, not the most sustainable system. The best thing we can do is keep our food scraps in our yard. I mean, again, it's the fewest resources possible to deal with them. So you do it at home.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
What do you do for all these people that live in apartments and condominiums that don't have a yard?
Well, that's what collective resource compost started. That's literally how she started. She lived in an apartment building. She said, I don't have a yard. How can I do this? So she created a bucket. She calls it a container swap now, container swap service, where she brings it's a 5-gallon bucket. If you're a single homeowner, it can be one of the totes that the church has in the parking lot that's used at the drop off now. That's typically what a condo building would use, one of those totes, and you figure out how many you need. You figure out how many people might be interested, and then it just gets picked up once a week or once every other week, depending on how quickly it fills. It just becomes, it's just a contract between the building, the homeowners association, and the private hauler.
Right, and I would just add for an individual. So I have a subscription to Collective Resource, I have a condominium, and they pick it up every other week.
Right, so you
For me,
need,
which is fine.
you could just do it yourself.
You
Yes.
personally, Jennifer, or with your
Me
whole?
personally, and so they come to our area, so I'm in Glenview. And they come to-
And they come to our condo every week.
Yeah,
Everybody,
yeah,
almost
You have
everybody.
something down at the garage, so.
Yes.
Yeah.
I keep mine either in the
And they know how to get
kitchen,
into the garage. and
it's
they-
either in the kitchen or
And
it's
I'm
in the
working
garage.
with a lot of
This
other
is literally
buildings.
what I do.
Probably don't want to-
Just real quick, I gotta go, but, Elsa DeJager is another resource in our congregation. Someone who knows how to help people get rid of things that they no longer
Yeah,
can use and finding the right place for them to go.
Yeah. I have back
Thanks,
here,
Jeffrey.
with deconstruction. Economically, how does that handle it? It's supposed to be a lot more expensive to deconstruct it, at least for the person doing it. So does this company from Wisconsin come in and do it? And do they make enough money to cover their cost and pay their employees, or is it something that's done out of tax write-off or something?
Right, it's a good question. Honestly, I don't know.
I can speak to that,
Please
just
do.
have a second. So Rebuilding Exchange in Evanston is also used as a training facility to teach people how to take things apart. And it is I believe, a nonprofit organization. So if you call them and you ask them, you're remodeling your kitchen, you ask them to do deconstruction, it means they come in for a very reasonable cost. They train people, they take your stuff away. So instead of having the wreckers come in, they reuse those materials.
Right.
And I would just agree with Liz,
Interesting.
their warehouse is fantastic. Our kitchen cabinets, granite,
Yeah,
light fixtures, refrigerators.
right.
It's great.
I mean, I just had two things I took out of my house. We had a basin that leaked and flooded my.
Yes.
Just messed up the wall. I had to take the thing out of my shower, plastic fiberglass thing. It's got a crack in it. It's probably not usable. I don't know what to do with that. I put the fan out that we took down. Hopefully someone will pick it up and wrap it up. Nice note. But it's not picked up, it will be recycled. I mean, I'll be having this.
Right, and
Yeah.
some stuff that's,
Right.
some stuff, there isn't always a recycling.
But it's
chance for it.
reusable. So they took my fancy sink that I didn't want anymore.
Right.
So they'll take it and then they'll resell it. And
Yeah, I
it's-
went to have that with the fan, they weren't taking it, so I made effort to do it.
There are also two other levels for this. One, Winnetka has an ordinance that they will reduce your tear down fees if you recycle what you tear down. You can still bulldoze it, but you have to take it to a recycling center to recycle the wood and the concrete and other things. Or you can not only give all the accoutrements to the house, you can actually take it down stick by stick. We did a garage once and the Polish contractor came in, literally had a guy, they took every piece of lumber, put it in a truck. It was still 8 feet long, 2x4s, and used it somewhere else. So
Right.
there are a number of different ways to slice that bologna,
Exactly,
and here's how you do this.
right, so some of it gets donated, but obviously some of it would be literally sold and reused.
Yeah,
in
some of the
other-
lumber, you can, like our house is real 2x4s. I mean,
Right.
it's a really valuable
It's
piece of
truly
lumber.
reused,
We
right.
took it apart.
There's a guy that comes around, right before garbage day, knows who has garbage days planned, and stabbing, picks out stuff. And, you know, you get the fan probably has some copper in it. I was
Right.
thinking about that copper's pretty.
Exactly. Exactly, so
Doesn't
there's,
doesn't the government also give you tax write-offs and credits if you use old material? Because our neighbors 2 doors down built a new house, which is probably worth $2 to $3 million. And they used old bricks from a brick factory on the south side and in the construction of the house.
there could be, I don't, honestly, the built environment is
That's
something I know
important, I'm
least
sure.
about. I know, that's why I have somebody else in Go Green Winnetka who knows about it.
You could probably get LEED certification points for doing that.
Right.
It wouldn't be an immediate return on your investment, but something if you resold the house.
It for sure is. Yeah, no, I know that counts. I know, and actually the Writers Theater, that they used all the brick from the women's club in their new theater. It's amazing.
Right.
How do they clean that brick? I mean, with all the mortar, I mean, how do they extract the brick from all the mortar? I can't figure
That part I don't know, but we did an event there a few years ago. It's amazing how they use that brick. In a theater in the round, no less.
Unfortunately, I just sold up my house and the contractor didn't care. I had 1886 white oak beams in the basement. They didn't care. And you know,
That's too
he
bad.
just,
Yeah.
you know, he didn't
Yeah.
have any constraints from the village or anything. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a voluntary program. It's
Yeah,
not,
right.
it's not an
But
ordinance
there's-
that says you must,
And
Yeah.
within Winnetka.
you may,
Right.
you not must.
Right, we hardly ever do must, lots of may.
That's amazing.
But, the village did just, adopt the 2040 Futures Comprehensive Plan. And there is language in there about deconstruction, about neighborhoods and sort of, ambiance, but it's more like making sure that that things are consistent, not identical, but, you know, so I think the language in there, I think, gets at the right things, and the best thing we can do, to support anything is always find language in the comp plan and do it, basically. The best thing you can do now.
I will say this, I had someone who's gonna redo my front door, it's 1932, never been refinished. He said, I'd pay you $10,000 now, and I could sell it in the open market. I'm gonna finish it. I said, no.
Oh, yeah.
But
This old house, we know that.
I didn't realize it could be worse. There are actually pieces in your house that, you know, handmade, it's heavy oak. It's expensive.
Exactly, and it's a work of art for somebody, I mean, it's amazing. So the other documents that I brought, and again, they're all available online, for anybody who's listening to the recording later. Again, I started to say this and then we got off track. The business card is really talking at how to use finished compost, because it's trying to get at people, trying to remind people that we don't just need to divert our food scraps and not put them in the landfill. We then need to use the end product that is created, the finished compost, and use it in our yards, use it in our public works projects. There needs to be a market for it, because otherwise we're just creating a whole lot of something that's still gonna sit there and not be used. So it's important for the church, for businesses, for homeowners to think about ways to use finished compost instead of fertilizer, instead of mulch. So this business card, we created it last year. Terry upped it this year. I had the language last year. So last year, each year International Compost Awareness Week has a theme. Last year it was recipe for regeneration, and there was a cute image. There's always a poster. It's a contest internationally to design the poster each year. So the poster is always different. And then they had another graphic last year that highlighted the recipe idea. So it had a recipe card and a wooden spoon. And we really liked that. And I really picked up on the recipe idea. And I was like, there's a recipe for compost. It's food scraps. It's like cooking. You chop up your food scraps to make that cook more easily in your compost. You mix it with other ingredients. You get it to the right temperature at some point. And then how you use it is also like food. It's like a seasoning, people. You don't need to just have, people think you need gardens to have compost. No, your whole yard will thank you for using compost. Sprinkle it on your grass, use it around your tree beds, use it in all of it. Your grass, your yard, our clay soil, our stormwater management will all help you, will all thank you. Because using the compost helps aerate the soil. In our clay-rich soil in Winnetka, it doesn't absorb water. Literally putting compost in adds pockets of air that hold water and slow its flow under and above ground. Not to mention the canopy that's created by the trees and the foliage and the shrubs that also slow the flow and absorb, and the deep roots that are created by the plants that can live there. All of that helps our stormwater fundamentally. We all want to use finished compost. So this little card is a reminder about, you can really use it anywhere. It's like salt. You can't have too much of it. Maybe that wasn't the right thing to say. You can, some people can't have too much of it, but you know, in all things in moderation, but you can use it everywhere. And then of course you can use it around plants and things like that, but you can really use it everywhere. So the three documents that are over there, and I did bring enough for everybody. This is a two-page composting guide that Go Green Winnetka created. It is on the village website and it shows all of the items in text, and we tried to get some good images that are accepted in Winnetka's drop-off program and what isn't accepted in Winnetka's drop-off program and why. So for example, landscape waste is not accepted in the program. That doesn't mean landscape waste is not compostable. It always is. But this program is not for that. It's not supposed to be a substitute for the village's current lawn and leaf management program. It's for food scraps. And again, maybe some other organics, but they don't want it to be a substitute. They certainly don't want people bringing their landscape waste to a school, to the church, or anywhere else. But again, it's important for people to know, of course, that landscape waste is compostable. It's fundamental to the process. But you can't, they just don't want you to bring your landscape waste to the drop-off sites. But if you were going to try to compost at home, you absolutely would be wanting to find that landscape material. Dried leaves, peat moss is a great way to start. Any kind of moss. We just scraped some moss off of putting green. It worked great. So, and then some of the packaging, some of the paper packaging that's allowed, this is what's not allowed. But so this is truly meant like a recycling bag. Take it home. And if you have questions about it or ideas for improvement, honestly, we welcome them. This was a 6-month process. It started last August when the drop-off sites were created. And we just finished it like in March. It just took that long to get it, put it all together. So very much a work in process. And again, it will evolve a little bit potentially. So let me know of any ideas. And then the second document is just an announcement that Go Green Winnetka put out. But basically letting people know that if you have questions about composting specifically, but again, really materials management in general, we can help. We want to help. We can help you if you're an individual, a church, a business, a school. We can help with a system that works. We can help set up your indoor composting system, your outdoor composting system, other collections, whatever it is. So that's just an FYI. We also are selling these compost bins, but again, it's just as part of the service. If you want to start composting at home, we can help. And we got these through another nonprofit in Wisconsin, ironically. They make them available to other nonprofits in schools only. They're not available in stores. So I like them and I'm happy to talk more about them. And then the last thing that's in the little packet is another one-page flyer that we created on the many benefits of composting and some specifics about International Compost Awareness Week and the theme this year. And then the last thing I'll say is this week is also Compost Awareness Week in Illinois because our own state senator Laura Fine introduced Senate Resolution 62, sorry. The bill was 52, the resolution was 62. The resolution was adopted a couple of weeks ago and it designates this week of International Compost Awareness Week as Compost Awareness Week in the state of Illinois. Next year, we'll get the village to do a proclamation. Some other communities did that this year, and I was too busy up working on the state one to think about getting it to the village, but it's a great idea. And it's just a way to highlight the importance and ease of doing something with your food scraps and other organics other than put them in a landfill.
So that means they'll do it every year this week?
It will happen. So International Compost Awareness Week happens every year. The resolutions in Illinois, at least, are only in effect for 1 year. The difference is that's what makes them a resolution. She introduced the bill first. The bill would have been permanent. It would have made the first week in May every year Compost Awareness Week. We wouldn't have to do it every year. The state Senate has a reluctance, at least this year, to make any permanent changes. It would change the state commemorative dates calendar, and they didn't want to do that. Don't know why. There was a soil health week bill. Soil health week bill was also considered, and it was a resolution, sorry, but same answer. It got through the House, but then when it got to the Senate, they're like, no, we don't want to change the calendar, but maybe next year they will.
Yeah.
So for now, it's a one-off, but it's still really good. And so, by the way, I forgot to say, I started to say, we know there are activities around the world this week, but in Illinois, after our virtual programming and kind of our hybrid last year, we have a full in-person. We do a hybrid again this year. I'm leading a lunch and learn at noon on Wednesday. The next day, a lovely woman is leading an international cafe, which is going to talk about some of the efforts going on around the world. But today is all in person. We have almost 30 events in 6 different counties in Illinois that are highlighting composting,
Wow.
including a winery in Lake County that's offering wine tastings with his compost supported wines. So there's truly something for everybody. There's lots of kid-friendly stuff, family-friendly stuff. I just didn't do a good job kind of pushing. I realized when the messenger came out yesterday, I was like, should have gotten that in there last week, but just wasn't in front of it enough. But there's a lot happening this week on the compost front, and that will continue to be the case in Illinois, because we will continue to work on those issues. And I will, too, as the zero waste policy manager of the Illinois Environmental Council.
Liz,
Yes.
I mean, all this is good stuff. My question is there any way to measure the value of this stuff? Is there, in every 10 gallon of composting that I do, does it reduce the amount of methane by some number or whatever? I mean, is there anything that we can latch on to that gives us a real feel of value of what we've accomplished?
It's a great question, Paul. There is, I've seen those, usually those kinds of stats I've seen. So you may know an organization, heard of an organization called SCARES in Addison. SCARES is actually an acronym that stands for like School and Community Recovery, Recycling and Community Education Center or something like that. But they truly recycle everything. And each year, each fall, they do a pumpkin smash. And they've done this since 2014. So I know that they have statistics that are focused on that. The EPA actually might have statistics on the new food scrap website for the equation for what, diverting food scraps means for emissions avoided or methane avoided. I don't have it off the top of my head, but there are a couple. I locally, I know it's like the measuring the emissions. There are ways to do that. Part of the issue with knowing in Winnetka specifically, things like recycling or compost, like what we're diverting and measuring that, is that we're often combined with other communities. And so it's hard to identify what literally came from Winnetka. So when Chuck was on the EFC, we tried for years to try to get that kind of information about recycling volume and numbers and diversion rates. And it's just not kept because we're kind of a small community that is combined with other communities on their routes, including our food scraps. Like they don't have any way to figure out what the volume of organic waste coming from just Winnetka is, because it gets combined with all the other North Shore communities on the same day. So, but there are some tools to do that. I'm not as comfortable.
Scarce is in my part of the world, used to be in Glen Ellen, our sister city, and it moved up, but there's so much they do, they recycle for schools.
Yeah.
School materials,
Yeah.
anything like that, bottle caps, even oyster shells.
Yeah.
And, I could always just
Right.
put that stuff in my car and take
Exactly,
it up
take it
there,
over.
because I'm driving by there.
Red tags,
So. very
little
good.
plastic red tags. We should start collecting these in the church.
We should put that next
I'll
to
bring
the.
it next to the court.
Yeah.
So,
Would you like those? Because I haven't.
Yeah, it's on the local bread.
Yep, local bread, potatoes, anything. It's pristine plastic, but it's a perfect example, too small to be recycled in the curbside collection. They'll just fall through the sieve. But it's pristine plastic. So there are a couple charities that have started up, and they accumulate the tags exclusively, and approximately 260,000 tags get turned into one basic wheelchair for someone in need. So they take them to a facility that recycles them, because there's a little bit special recycling that has to happen. But these companies work specifically with the charities to make sure the money that is earned from the recycling goes back to the charity, and it's called bread tags for wheelchairs. So Glencoe started doing it, a friend of mine in Glencoe. Started
Would
doing
it be worth me, like, coming up with a list with scarce
Uh-huh.
takes?
It
and
would, we,
Say,
yes.
here's some things and focus on 2 or 3 things
Yeah.
that you would start.
But the schools are doing bread tags, so we could add on to their collection. I mean, and I have a mason jar
Yeah,
with
you've
like
got that.
with the thing, I would bring it.
Yeah.
It's the regular quart-sized mason jar that's about 800 to 1,000 kegs.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the
I
oysters
just learned
earlier, I know a lot of you guys eat raw oysters all the time.
Yeah.
But
I love the school supplies. I also will say, Alan, if you're out there, check out Go Green Glen Ellen. They're a new group, Go Green Glen Ellen. So everybody knows, apologies, Go Green Winnetka is one of many community groups in the Illinois, I mean, in the state, but primarily the Chicagoland area. But we're community-based groups, grassroots groups that are truly citizens groups. I also happen to serve on our Environmental and Forestry Commission, but Go Green Winnetka is a 501c3 nonprofit citizens advocacy
Right.
environmental group. Their Go Green Winnetka was the first Go Green group to get started, very robust. They do a plant sale next Saturday is their native plant sale at Gilson Beach. Go Green Winnetka started about 6 years later, and right when we got started, a couple other communities neighboring, of course, thank you so much, got started as well. And now there's an umbrella group called Go Green Illinois that meets every other month at the Botanic Garden. They've met consistently since 2013, in person, then virtually through, and now continuing after the pandemic to make it easier for people to attend. But the people in Go Green Glen Ellen are kicking BUTT. She's doing a great job. They're doing a lot of great work on their coordinating with their park district, doing like equipment swaps, shoe exchanges, the pumpkin smash. But so help remind Alan to get on Go Green Glen Ellen's mailing list. He'll love it.
Go Green Illinois, the umbrella, I'm hoping does a great job so all these community organizations can share ideas.
Exactly. That's the whole purpose of it. So Beth started Go Green Illinois, Beth from Go Green Wilmette, started Go Green Illinois for the whole purpose of connecting our groups and communities and making it easier for us to do the work, not reinvent the wheel, figure out what works, adapt what we need to. Yes.
I live in covenant living in Northbrook. And we are very, in our area, concerned that the two bins in our mechanical room for each of our units has one for recycle, which is paper, recyclable plastic, etc. And one of the people, sorry, in our group is a shark about these things. But the other group is garbage. And garbage is put in plastic bags. There goes the usefulness of every food item
Exactly.
inside the plastic bags.
Exactly.
And this is a whole organization that does the same thing. So right there, we have no way of dealing with that in the current setup.
Right.
And we've been talking with organizations like Covenant Living, all of the retirement or apartment situations about this.
Yeah, most definitely. That's exactly what we work like that. Again, that's exactly what collective resource compost can do, is help that kind of community. But in Northbrook, you guys are actually, you have really good systems in Northbrook. You have a sustainability coordinator, Tessa Murray. You should call Tessa Murray because they may have Tessa Murray.
Through the village hall.
Mhm. And they may have resources specifically for multi-unit buildings in Northbrook.
Okay.
Those are being.
Thank you so much for your support.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Very inspirational.
If I could just put out a challenge, if anybody in this circle is not using the collection site that we have here at the church, if you have I would like for you to come right now. Liz Kunkle, and she is going to take away those obstacles so that you will be able to use the compost facility that we have here at the church.
Thank you, Jennifer. There's a perfect way, this, several weeks, the church member can take all their compost and put it in. Finish this one.